Picture the scene: a red carpet, blinding with flashbulbs, a sea of silk and jewels, a figure moving gracefully under the weight of immense public expectation. This is the world of instant judgment, where every step is analyzed and every choice becomes a headline. Now, hold that image in your mind and let it shift. Suddenly, you're not looking at a gala, but at a hospital ward, a schoolroom, a protest line. The same figure is there, but the context has completely transformed. The glamour has been replaced by grit. How does a person make that leap? How does someone evolve from being a symbol of wealth and status into a genuine force for change? This is the fascinating journey we're exploring today. The story of the red carpet casualty who becomes an advocate, the individual who trades the spotlight of superficial fame for the hard, meaningful work of making a difference. We often see these transformations as modern celebrity redemption arcs, a public figure rehabilitating their image through philanthropy. But this pattern has a much deeper, richer history. Long before social media and 24-hour news cycles, the women of the Gilded Age and various royal families were navigating these exact same pressures. They were the original celebrities, their lives playing out on a public stage just as grand and unforgiving as any today. Initially celebrated or harshly scrutinized for their wealth, their marriages, their fashion, they were often dismissed as mere ornaments. Society placed them on a pedestal, but it was a gilded cage. The true story, the one we often miss, is what happened when these women decided to break out of that cage. They took the one thing the world had given them, their immense platform, and turned it into a tool for progress. This video is an invitation to step behind the velvet rope and discover the real lives of these remarkable figures. We'll trace the paths of Gilded Age heiresses who could have spent their fortunes on endless parties, but instead funded libraries, hospitals, and social reforms that shaped nations. We'll meet royals who were trapped by tradition, but fought to use their titles to champion causes from public health to human rights. Their journeys are not just historical footnotes. They are powerful narratives about the search for purpose. It's a story of defying expectations, of transforming privilege into responsibility, and of finding a voice when the world only wants to see a silhouette. So get comfortable, because we're about to dive into a world where the most glittering beginnings often lead to the most profound legacies, proving that a fall from public grace can sometimes be the first step toward a truly meaningful ascent. To truly grasp the pressure these women faced, we must understand what the red carpet represented in their world. It was far more than a strip of colored fabric. It was the entire theater of public life for the elite, a stage where one's value was constantly being appraised. For a young Gilded Age heiress, her red carpet moment was her debutante ball. This wasn't merely a party. It was a high-stakes debut into society, a ritual where she was presented as a commodity of wealth and breeding. The guest list, the grandeur of her gown, the perfection of her curtsy, every detail was scrutinized by the press and the powerful families who could make or break her future. Her entire worth in the eyes of that world could be determined in a single evening. For a royal princess or a duchess, the red carpet was a state banquet, a coronation, or her own wedding. These were global events long before television, with every move documented by newspapers and illustrated magazines. The pressure was immense to be beautiful but not vain, intelligent but not challenging, fashionable but not frivolous. She had to embody an impossible ideal, a living symbol of her family's name or her nation's prestige. Her posture, her smile, the subtle choice of a brooch, everything was a statement loaded with meaning, open to interpretation, and all too often to brutal criticism. In this relentless spotlight, a single misstep, a whispered scandal, a perceived fashion faux pas, a moment of unscripted emotion, could see a woman transformed from a celebrated icon into a casualty of the very system that elevated her. She would be labeled difficult, eccentric, or worse, and the same society that once adored her could turn its back with stunning speed. This was the Gilded Cage in its most potent form, a life of immense privilege built on a foundation of eggshells. This world of extraordinary wealth and pressure was most vividly embodied by the great industrial dynasties like the Vanderbilts and the Astors. Their fortunes, accumulated almost beyond comprehension from railroads and real estate, created a new American aristocracy. But for the daughters of these families, this unprecedented wealth came with a specific and demanding role. They were not expected to manage the businesses or engage in politics. Their purpose was to be the glittering public face of the family's success. And the primary stage for this performance was the society ball. These were not simple parties. They were exercises in competitive opulence, designed to secure a family's place in the social hierarchy. The most famous example is Alva Vanderbilt's costume ball of 1883, an event so lavish it reportedly cost $250,000, a staggering sum equivalent to millions today. It was a deliberate and masterful act of social conquest, a declaration that the Vanderbilts, once considered new money, had arrived. For a young heiress like Consuelo Vanderbilt or her peers, these balls were their red carpet premieres. Every aspect was meticulously planned, from the exact shade of silk in her gown to the number of ostrich plumes in her hair. The press covered these events with breathless detail, and the public devoured every description, turning these young women into the first true American celebrities. Yet this adoration was a double-edged sword. While they were celebrated, they were also trapped. Their lives became public property, their every move a topic for gossip columns. Their value was narrowly defined not by their intellect or character, but by the size of their father's fortune and the perfection of their social performance. This created a peculiar form of fame. They were simultaneously empowered by their wealth and imprisoned by the expectations that came with it. The pressure to conform, to marry well, and to uphold the family name was immense, leaving little room for personal ambition or authentic self-expression. The natural next step in this carefully choreographed life was the transatlantic marriage market. For the newly rich American families, a title from the European aristocracy was the ultimate status symbol, the final seal of social legitimacy. For the cash-poor but title-rich European nobles, the enormous dowry of an American heiress was a financial lifeline that could restore a crumbling castle and sustain a lavish lifestyle. This created a brisk trade where young women, barely out of their teens, became the central figures in a high-stakes negotiation. Their feelings, their aspirations, were often the least important consideration. The goal was a strategic alliance that would benefit the family's social standing or financial security. A duke or a prince was the ultimate accessory, a living trophy that proved an American family's arrival on the world stage. This system treated these heiresses as the ultimate luxury goods, beautiful, expensive, and symbolic of power. They were shipped across the ocean, their fortunes exchanged for a title, and expected to seamlessly integrate into the even more rigid and traditional world of European court life. It was a transition from one gilded cage to another, often with even less freedom and more scrutiny. The spotlight followed them, but now it was amplified by the ancient prestige of a royal title, turning their personal struggles into matters of international interest and commentary. While the transatlantic marriages of the Gilded Age might feel like a relic of the past, the dynamics they set in motion are more relevant than ever. We can draw a direct and powerful line from the ballrooms of New York to the balconies of Buckingham Palace, observing how the scrutiny faced by heiresses has evolved into a relentless, 24/7 reality for modern royal women. The pressure to be perfect, to embody an ideal, and to navigate a world of rigid protocol has not disappeared. It has been supercharged by the digital age. Today's princesses and duchesses walk a digital red carpet that is infinitely longer and more unforgiving than anything Consuelo Vanderbilt could have imagined. Their stage is no longer just a physical event covered by a few society columnists the next morning. It is a global, instantaneous network of cameras, smartphones, and social media platforms where every expression, every outfit, and every interaction is captured, pixelated, and analyzed within seconds by millions. The 24-hour news cycle and the insatiable appetite of online commentary have transformed royal life into a performance with no intermission. A royal tour, a charity event, even a casual walk, each is treated as a high-stakes media event. The protocols themselves, the ancient rules of decorum and presentation, create a framework that is both a shield and a cage. While tradition offers a script to follow, it also leaves little room for spontaneity or genuine human emotion. A modern royal must master the art of the controlled smile, the perfectly timed wave, all while knowing that a single moment of fatigue, frustration, or simple human error can be isolated, turned into a meme, and used to define her for weeks. This constant surveillance creates a psychological toll that is difficult to overstate. The pressure to be perpetually gracious, polished, and politically neutral is immense, a weight that is compounded by the knowledge that their every choice, from a designer handbag to a casual remark, will be dissected for hidden meanings and judged against an impossible standard of perfection. This digital arena has also created a new pathway for public downfall. In the Gilded Age, a scandal might unfold over weeks in the newspapers. Today, a narrative can be constructed and a reputation damaged in a matter of hours. Social media, in particular, acts as a brutal court of public opinion, where anonymous accounts can level criticisms that traditional media would never publish. A perceived misstep, a fashion choice deemed inappropriate, a moment of perceived coldness towards a well-wisher, or a failure to adhere to unspoken royal rules, can trigger a tidal wave of online judgment. The very tools that could allow a royal to connect directly with the public also become weapons for their critique. This creates a paradox. To be relatable is to risk being seen as undignified, but to be too distant is to be labeled aloof or out of touch. Navigating this narrow path requires a level of media savvy and emotional resilience that is unprecedented. The story of a modern royal is therefore a continuation of the same struggle faced by the Gilded Age heiresses, the battle to be seen as a multidimensional human being within a system that often prefers a silent, smiling symbol. The cages may be digital now, but they are just as real, and the stakes of breaking free are played out on a global scale. For Consuelo Vanderbilt, the transition from celebrated debutante to public casualty was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, agonizing march towards a fate decided by others. The scandal was not one of illicit affairs or public disgrace in the traditional sense. It was the scandal of a human heart being systematically overruled by dynastic ambition. The entire courtship was a spectacle orchestrated by her formidable mother, Alva, who saw in the Duke of Marlborough the ultimate prize. The press, eager for a real-life fairy tale, played along, breathlessly reporting every interaction between the young American heiress and the aloof English aristocrat. The narrative was set. The beautiful, fabulously wealthy American princess was to rescue the noble Duke and his magnificent Blenheim palace with her fortune. But behind the glittering headlines, a much darker story was unfolding. Consuelo was in love with another man, Winthrop Rutherford, a match her mother found entirely unsuitable. Alva employed ruthless tactics to secure the ducal marriage, reportedly confining a heartbroken Consuelo to her room, even feigning serious illness to emotionally blackmail her daughter into compliance. On the day of the wedding in 1895, the public saw a vision of perfection. Consuelo, just 18 years old, was a picture of ethereal beauty in a gown of white satin, her train carried by pages. But those close enough to see her face noted the tears streaming down her cheeks, hidden from the crowds but impossible to miss for the wedding guests. The truth began to seep out. Whispers started in the drawing rooms of New York and London. The newspapers, which had once painted the union as a storybook romance, began to carry hints of the coercion involved. The public's perception started to shift. The celebrated heiress, the envy of every society mother, was now also an object of profound pity. She was no longer just a symbol of wealth. She was a casualty of it. Her personal devastation became a quiet, open secret. Her life at Blenheim Palace was one of immense loneliness and isolation, trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who is said to have been in love with another woman himself. The Duke, it was rumored, was more interested in the $2.5 million dowry, equivalent to over $70 million today, that rescued his estate, than he was in his young bride. Consuelo had fulfilled her societal duty perfectly, but in doing so, she had been stripped of her autonomy, her first love, and her happiness. The very system that had elevated her to celebrity status had now revealed its cruel underbelly, turning her from an icon of success into a tragic figure, a warning about the human cost of gilded ambition. She became the ultimate red carpet casualty, a woman who had everything the world could offer, except the freedom to choose her own path. The glittering facade of fame and fortune often conceals a profound internal struggle, a psychological battle fought in the silent, private moments between public appearances. For a woman cast as a public casualty, the emotional fallout is not a single event, but a constant, grinding erosion of her sense of self. Imagine the deep and chilling isolation of being constantly surrounded by people yet feeling utterly alone. For Consuelo Vanderbilt, trapped in the cavernous halls of Blenheim Palace. This loneliness would have been amplified by the stark realization that she was fundamentally a transaction. The man she called her husband valued her fortune more than her companionship, and the society that celebrated her marriage saw her not as a person, but as a successful merger of capital and title. This breeds a specific kind of betrayal, not a dramatic, singular act of treachery, but a slow, dawning awareness that the very people who should have been her protectors, her family, had willingly sacrificed her happiness on the altar of social climbing. Her own mother, the architect of her gilded prison, became a source of this profound betrayal, forcing Consuelo to confront the painful truth that her value was conditional. This loss of identity is perhaps the most devastating wound. From childhood, a Gilded Age heiress was groomed for one purpose: to be a perfect reflection of her family's status. Her identity was constructed around her beauty, her manners, her suitability for a prestigious marriage. When that constructed identity leads only to misery, a terrifying void opens up. Who is she, if not the celebrated debutante or the Duchess of Marlborough? The persona the world recognizes is a shell, and the person inside feels invisible, her own desires and dreams rendered irrelevant. This psychological crisis is a crucible, an intense fire of suffering that has the potential to either destroy a person or forge them into something entirely new. It is in this state of utter brokenness that a profound shift can begin. The old identity, built on sand to please others, has crumbled. What emerges from the ashes is not a sudden, fully formed new person, but a desperate, groping search for authenticity. For a modern royal, the psychological toll is magnified by the relentless, digital age scrutiny. The trauma is not confined to a single coercive act, but is a daily assault of microscopic criticism and invasive speculation. The hostile press and the anonymous cruelty of online commentators can create a state of hypervigilance, where a woman feels she can never let her guard down, never reveal a moment of genuine human frailty. Every smile becomes a performance, every gesture a calculated move in a game she never asked to play. This constant performance is exhausting and deeply alienating, creating a chasm between her public image and her private self. The betrayal here can feel systemic. It's the betrayal by the institution that is supposed to support her, but often prioritizes its own image over her well-being. The loss of identity is just as acute. Is she a beloved public figure, a villain in a media narrative, or simply a woman trying to navigate an impossible situation? The conflicting portrayals can shatter any stable sense of self. Yet, it is precisely within this chaotic internal landscape that the seeds of advocacy are often sown. The pain of being treated as an object sparks a fierce desire to reclaim agency. The loneliness of being misunderstood breeds a powerful empathy for others who are suffering or marginalized. The experience of having one's own voice silenced creates a determination to become a voice for those who have none. This period of crisis, as agonizing as it is, forces a fundamental reevaluation of what truly matters. When the pursuit of external validation through wealth, titles, or public admiration has led only to emptiness, the search turns inward. The question shifts from, who does the world want me to be, to who am I and what do I believe in, this is the pivotal moment where the red carpet casualty begins her metamorphosis. The journey out of the gilded cage starts not with a grand public gesture, but with this quiet, internal rebellion, a decision to stop performing and start living a life of purpose, defined not by privilege, but by principle. And so, from the depths of personal despair, a quiet but determined shift began. For Consuelo Vanderbilt, the Duchess of Marlborough, the grand, lonely corridors of Blenheim Palace became the unlikely training ground for her reinvention. Philanthropy was not an immediate, dramatic leap into the public eye. It was a gradual, deliberate process of reclamation, a way to find purpose in the very prison that confined her. Using the considerable resources of her title and the fortune she brought to the marriage, she started to direct her attention and her funds outward, toward the struggles of women and children who, in their own ways, were also trapped by the rigid structures of Edwardian society. This was a subtle yet profound form of rebellion. While she was expected to host lavish parties and maintain the estate's glittering reputation, she began to involve herself in the gritty, unglamorous work of social reform. She became a patron of hospitals and organizations dedicated to improving maternal and infant health, causes that were deeply personal for a woman who had experienced the profound isolation of a loveless union and the pressures of producing an heir. These initial steps were often taken behind the scenes, away from the flashbulbs that had once documented her every social move. She would visit clinics, not as a distant figurehead, but to understand the challenges faced by mothers living in poverty. She used her influence to quietly fund programs that provided health care and education, creating small pockets of support in a system that offered little. In doing so, she was not just giving away money. She was building a new identity, piece by piece. The woman who had been valued only for her pedigree and her fortune was now discovering her own capacity for empathy and effective action. This work provided a sanctuary from the emptiness of her personal life. In the faces of the women she sought to help, she saw reflections of her own powerlessness, but also a shared resilience. Their struggles gave context to her own, transforming her personal pain into a driving force for communal good. This was the crucial turning point, the moment a casualty of the system stopped seeing herself as a victim and began to wield the tools of that very system, her title, her wealth, her platform, as instruments of change. It was a silent protest against the notion that her life's value was confined to her role as a wife and mother in a decaying aristocracy. By advocating for the health and rights of other women, she was, in essence, advocating for a version of herself that had been denied, an autonomous individual with a voice and a purpose. This quiet dedication to philanthropy became her true education, a masterclass in leadership and compassion that would eventually fuel her complete break for freedom. The seeds of advocacy, planted in the shadow of a gilded cage, were beginning to take root. Yet for many of these women, the catalyst for such a profound personal revolution was not found within the gilded walls of their own homes, but out in the wider world. It was a process of awakening, sparked by education and a deliberate exposure to realities far removed from their sheltered existence. The very privilege that had insulated them from hardship became the vehicle that carried them toward a new understanding. Travel, for instance, was more than a grand tour of European capitals. For a curious mind, it could be a masterclass in social comparison. A duchess accustomed to the rituals of the English countryside might visit the tenements of New York or the industrial cities of the continent, and the stark contrast between her life of ease and the grinding poverty of the working classes could not be ignored. Reading, too, became a radical act. While society expected them to focus on light novels and fashion plates, many of these women secretly devoured the works of social reformers, economists, and philosophers. Through the printed page, they encountered ideas about workers' rights, public health crises, and the systemic inequalities that their own wealth helped to perpetuate. This intellectual curiosity was often complemented by personal encounters. They began to seek out conversations not just with other aristocrats, but with doctors running free clinics, with settlement house workers, and with activists on the front lines of social change. These interactions were transformative, replacing abstract notions of the poor with the faces and stories of real people. The carefully constructed bubble of privilege began to pop, one challenging conversation, one heartbreaking statistic, one firsthand glimpse of injustice at a time. No figure embodies this dramatic awakening more powerfully than Alva Vanderbilt herself. This is the profound irony of her story, the woman who was the ultimate architect of the Gilded Age, who so ruthlessly enforced its rules by orchestrating her own daughter's marriage, would become one of its most spectacular escapees. After achieving the social supremacy she so fiercely desired, Alva's own marriage to William Kissam Vanderbilt crumbled under the weight of his infidelity. The very system she had mastered ultimately betrayed her, granting her a title and a position, but not the loyalty or respect she deserved. This personal crisis became her education. Instead of retreating in quiet humiliation, as society might have expected, Alva channeled her formidable energy and intelligence into a completely new direction. Her exposure to the burgeoning women's suffrage movement was the spark that lit the fuse. She began attending meetings, listening to the arguments of leaders like Anna Howard Shaw and Carrie Chapman Catt, and she recognized in their fight for the vote the same fundamental struggle for autonomy that she had experienced in her own life. She realized that without political power, women, even the wealthiest women, were ultimately powerless to control their own destinies, their property, or their children. Alva's transformation from social climber to suffragist was total and uncompromising. She used the weapons of the old world to fight for a new one. Her vast fortune, once deployed to throw the most extravagant balls, was now funneled directly into the movement. She became one of the National American Woman Suffrage Association's most significant donors, funding campaigns, printing literature, and organizing rallies. But she offered far more than just money. She offered her social capital and her unparalleled understanding of publicity. In 1914, she staged one of the most brilliant political spectacles of the era, a massive suffrage parade down Fifth Avenue. This was not a fringe protest. It was a masterfully organized event designed to command attention and respect, leveraging the same principles of grandeur and spectacle that she had used to conquer New York society. By aligning herself so publicly with a cause that was still considered radical by many, Alva sent a shockwave through the establishment. She demonstrated that advocacy was not a quiet, charitable hobby, but a bold political act. In fighting for the rights of all women, she was, in a very real sense, fighting to rectify the system that had allowed her to commodify her own daughter. Her journey illustrates the most powerful aspect of this transformation. When education and exposure meet personal conviction, privilege can be converted into a force that shatters the very foundations of the status quo. Once the initial shock of their personal crisis subsided and a new sense of purpose began to take hold, these women faced a critical tactical question. How does one actually create change from within such a constrained position? The answer lay not in discarding the trappings of their old lives, but in repurposing them. They came to a revolutionary realization. The very instruments of their confinement, their famous names, their vast fortunes, their exclusive social access, were, in fact, powerful levers that could be pulled to move the world. This was the ultimate alchemy, turning the leaden weight of privilege into the gold of advocacy. They stopped seeing their platform as a burden to be endured and started viewing it as a toolkit to be deployed. A name that had been dragged through the gossip columns could open doors to political meetings that were closed to ordinary activists. A fortune that had been spent on frivolous extravagance could now fund a network of free clinics or a national advertising campaign for a cause. The social calendar, once a treadmill of obligatory appearances, became a covert intelligence gathering operation, a chance to lobby powerful men in drawing rooms where formal petitions would be dismissed. This required a deliberate and calculated reinvention of their public persona. They understood that to be taken seriously, they needed to transition from being a subject of gossip to becoming a subject matter expert. This was a profound shift in strategy. Instead of trying to control the narrative about their personal lives, they began flooding the zone with information about their chosen cause. They did the homework that many of their class considered beneath them. They studied parliamentary reports, public health data, and economic analyses. They surrounded themselves not with sycophants, but with the leading doctors, economists, and reformers of the day. When Alva Belmont, as she was known after her remarriage, took up the mantle of women's suffrage, she didn't just write checks. She mastered the arguments. She could debate political strategy with the best of them, and she used her formidable social skills to corner politicians and editors, armed not with small talk, but with facts and figures. She transformed her Fifth Avenue mansion, a symbol of Vanderbilt excess, into a strategic headquarters for the movement, a place where rallies were planned and leaflets were printed. In doing so, she forced the press to talk about her on her own terms. The headlines gradually shifted from Alva Belmont's latest ball to Alva Belmont addresses suffrage rally. She weaponized her own celebrity, using the public's fascination with her to draw massive crowds to events that would have otherwise been ignored. This strategic pivot was about more than just effective philanthropy. It was a masterclass in changing the conversation. By becoming an undeniable expert, they insulated themselves from the trivial criticisms that had once defined them. It's much harder to dismiss a duchess as a frivolous socialite when she is quoting infant mortality rates with precision or explaining the nuances of labor law. Their newfound expertise gave them a gravitas that their titles alone never could. It commanded a different kind of respect, one rooted in competence and conviction rather than birthright. This approach also allowed them to achieve a level of influence that was uniquely theirs, A government minister might refuse a meeting with a delegation of factory workers, but he could not easily refuse a meeting with a duke's wife, especially when she arrived not to ask for a favor for herself, but to present a well-researched case for sanitation reforms that would benefit his own constituents. They operated in the space between the powerless and the powerful, using their privilege as a Trojan horse to smuggle progressive ideas into the highest echelons of society. Their advocacy became a focused beam of light, concentrating the diffuse energy of their privilege onto a single, impactful point. They learned that a famous name could get a cause a hearing, but only knowledge and strategic action could turn that hearing into real, lasting change. This conscious pivot toward building a new network was perhaps the most critical strategic move in their transformation. It represented a complete break from the old world, a declaration that they were no longer content to be ornaments in a society that had caused them such pain. The glittering social circles of their past, filled with aristocrats and fellow heiresses, were often toxic environments where gossip was the primary currency and maintaining appearances was the ultimate goal. To truly change, they had to physically and emotionally distance themselves from these spaces and seek out a different kind of company. They went looking for allies not in ballrooms, but in lecture halls, settlement houses, and the offices of radical publications. This meant deliberately building alliances with intellectuals, activists, and reformers people whose values were rooted in substance rather than status. For a duchess to be seen collaborating with a socialist economist, or for a Vanderbilt to host a salon for suffragists, was a deeply subversive act. It signaled a fundamental reordering of their priorities, placing shared purpose above social pedigree. This process of building a new support system was both practical and profoundly psychological. On a practical level, these new alliances provided the expertise they lacked. A woman raised to discuss fashion and bloodlines needed to understand the complexities of labor law or public health policy if she wanted to be an effective advocate. By surrounding themselves with leading thinkers and frontline workers, they gained an education that was far more valuable than their fortunes. They learned the language of change, the mechanics of legislation, and the realities of poverty from those who had dedicated their lives to the cause. But perhaps more importantly, this new network provided something their old circles never could: validation. Within the suffragette movement, Alva Belmont was not judged for her failed marriage or her aggressive social climbing. She was valued for her strategic mind, her unwavering commitment, and her financial power. For Consuelo, who would later divorce the Duke and dedicate her life to social welfare, finding a community of like-minded reformers offered a sense of belonging that her title had denied her. These new colleagues became a chosen family, a support system that affirmed their new identities and reinforced their mission. Their shared goal was not social advancement, but human progress, and this shared purpose created bonds of respect and camaraderie that were entirely absent from the transactional relationships of their past. We can see this strategy mirrored powerfully in modern times. A contemporary royal, constrained by the institution's traditional list of patronages, might deliberately seek out partnerships with smaller, more agile nonprofits that are tackling issues in innovative ways. While she may still fulfill her duties with established charities, her real passion project and her most impactful work could be with an organization working on mental health awareness or climate justice that operates outside the usual royal sphere. This alliance is mutually beneficial. The nonprofit gains a massive platform and a level of visibility it could never achieve on its own, while the royal gains access to grassroots expertise and a sense of authentic connection to the cause. She is no longer just a ribbon cutter. She becomes a genuine partner, learning from the activists and amplifying their work from within the system. This is the modern equivalent of a duchess stepping out of the palace and into the settlement house, a conscious choice to build a network based on impact, not inheritance. By creating these alliances, these women did more than just find new friends. They built the infrastructure for their new lives, constructing a foundation of knowledge, support, and shared purpose that would sustain their advocacy for decades to come. But this reinvention of self and realignment of alliances, however profound, remains a private matter until it is tested in the public arena. The true metamorphosis from casualty to advocate is cemented not in the quiet of a study or the strategy of a meeting, but in a single, decisive act that broadcasts the new identity to the world. This is the moment when the carefully constructed new persona is put on display, often in a way that directly confronts and shatters the old expectations. It is a performance, but one of profound authenticity, designed to send an unambiguous message. There is perhaps no more iconic example of this than the day in 1987 when Princess Diana, without gloves, shook the hand of a man living with AIDS. To understand the seismic impact of that handshake, we must recall the atmosphere of the time. The 1980s were a period of intense fear and ignorance surrounding HIV and AIDS. The disease was widely mischaracterized as a gay plague, and misinformation spread faster than the virus itself. Many people, including some medical professionals, believed it could be transmitted through casual contact, a doorknob, a drinking glass, or a simple touch. This fear bred a vicious stigma that isolated patients, often leaving them to suffer and die alone, abandoned by their families and shunned by society. The official response, particularly in its early years, was often slow and mired in prejudice. Into this climate of terror stepped Diana, then the Princess of Wales, to open Britain's first specialist AIDS ward at Middlesex Hospital. The world expected a royal visit, a carefully choreographed walkthrough, a distant smile, perhaps the unveiling of a plaque. What they got was a revolution. As she moved through the ward, Diana came to a patient named Ivan Cohen. Cameras clicked and whirred, capturing the scene. Then, she did the thing that protocol and public fear did not demand. She reached out her bare hand and took his. In that simple, silent gesture, she communicated more than any speech ever could. She communicated humanity. She looked the patient in the eye, spoke with him warmly, and in doing so, she physically bridged the chasm of fear that separated those with the disease from the rest of the world. The image, broadcast across the globe, was a thunderclap. It was a direct refutation of the prevailing narrative. Here was the most famous woman in the world, the mother of a future king, demonstrating by example that compassion, not fear, was the appropriate response. She used her immense platform not just to raise awareness, but to actively dismantle a harmful stereotype. In one graceful motion, she transformed her public image forever. The fairy tale princess, the fashion icon, the casualty of a crumbling marriage, was now indisputably a humanitarian. This was not a calculated publicity stunt. It was an act of profound moral courage that aligned perfectly with her growing private commitment to connecting with the marginalized. It demonstrated a key principle of effective advocacy. The most powerful statements are often those that are felt, not just heard. Diana understood that her visibility was her greatest asset, and she wielded it with precision to normalize compassion and challenge a deeply entrenched social injustice, proving that a single, fearless act of connection could change public perception on a global scale. Of course, any figure who dares to step so dramatically outside their prescribed role is bound to face a storm of backlash, and these women were no exception. Their transformation from ornaments of the elite to vocal advocates was often perceived as a profound betrayal by the very circles they had left behind. Former friends and social peers, who had once been their companions at balls and dinners, now viewed them with a mixture of bewilderment and contempt. To this old guard, a duchess involving herself in public health, or a Vanderbilt heiress campaigning for the vote, was not a noble pursuit. It was a violation of an unspoken social contract. They were seen as traitors to their class, embarrassing their families by engaging in matters considered undignified and far beneath their station. The whispered criticism in drawing rooms was often far more personal and cutting than any newspaper editorial, accusing them of being bored, eccentric, or simply seeking a new form of attention now that their conventional fame had faded. This social ostracization could be deeply painful, a reminder that in choosing a new path, they were irrevocably burning the bridges to their old lives. The press, which had once chronicled their every fashion choice with breathless admiration, now often turned into a tool of mockery and skepticism. Newspapers that were aligned with conservative or establishment interests portrayed their advocacy as naive, insincere, or even dangerous. When Alva Belmont threw her immense wealth and energy behind the suffrage movement, she was frequently caricatured in the press as a meddling, wealthy socialite who was dabbling in politics she couldn't possibly understand. Cartoons depicted her as a domineering figure, trying to lead a movement that was better left to serious, professional activists. The underlying message was always the same: stay in your lane. A woman of privilege was supposed to be a passive beneficiary of the system, not an active agent trying to change it. This criticism was designed to undermine their credibility, to frame their passion as a hobby and their commitment as a fleeting whim. For every positive story about a hospital wing they funded, there might be a snide column questioning their motives or highlighting a minor misstep to prove they were out of their depth. Perhaps the most formidable resistance came from the institutions themselves. These were powerful, entrenched systems governments, royal households, entire social hierarchies that had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. When these women started lobbying for labor reforms or public health initiatives, they were directly challenging the economic and political powers that be. A duchess advocating for better factory conditions was, by extension, criticizing the factory owners who were often her own peers or political allies of her husband. Institutional pushback could be subtle, like being quietly removed from a guest list for an important event, or it could be overt, such as facing political opposition that stalled their proposed legislation. Royal households, in particular, operated on a principle of neutrality and tradition. A royal family member becoming associated with a contentious political cause like suffrage was a nightmare for courtiers whose primary job was to avoid scandal and maintain the dignity of the crown. This institutional friction required a level of diplomatic skill and sheer stubbornness that these women had to develop quickly. So how did they develop the resilience to withstand this multi-front assault? Their strength often came from the very source of their transformation, a profound sense of personal conviction, having already endured the deepest kind of personal suffering, the loss of their autonomy and the shattering of their initial identity. The relatively superficial bruises of public criticism lost some of their sting. The pain of being called names in a newspaper was nothing compared to the pain of a forced marriage or the isolation of a gilded cage. This prior hardship had forged an internal fortitude. They had already faced the worst their world could throw at them on a personal level, which made the professional and public criticism easier to compartmentalize. Their commitment was no longer tied to public approval. It was rooted in the hard-won knowledge of what they believed was right. They also learned to handle criticism by focusing on the tangible results of their work. When a newspaper column mocked her efforts, Alva Belmont could point to the growing number of women registering to vote or the successful passage of a suffrage bill in a state legislature. When former peers sneered at Consuelo Vanderbilt's social work, she could see the direct impact in the improved health of the children in the clinics she supported. This focus on outcomes created a powerful feedback loop. Every small victory, every life touched, served as concrete proof that their work mattered far more than the gossip. It transformed criticism from a personal attack into mere background noise, an inevitable byproduct of attempting anything significant. They cultivated a strategic thick skin, learning to differentiate between valid, constructive feedback that could improve their efforts and the predictable ad hominem attacks that were meant to silence them. They understood that the backlash was not a sign of failure, but a sign that they were posing a real threat to the established order. The noise was a measure of their impact. This mindset shift was crucial. It allowed them to absorb the blows without being derailed, staying laser, focused on the cause that had given their lives a new and deeper meaning. Their journey taught them that true advocacy is not about being universally liked. It is about being effective, even if that means making powerful enemies along the way. Mastering the media landscape became the next critical skill in their evolution, a sophisticated dance where they transformed from prey into partners. These women recognized that the press, which had once been an instrument of their torment, was also a powerful amplifier. The key was not to hide from the spotlight, but to redirect it, shifting its focus from the trivia of their personal lives to the substance of their mission. This required a deliberate and often brilliant recalibration of their public engagements. Instead of granting interviews about their wardrobe or their latest social triumph, they began to orchestrate media opportunities centered entirely on their advocacy work. They would invite journalists to the opening of a new children's hospital wing they had funded, ensuring the story was about the medical equipment and the patients, not the donor. They would stage a press conference to announce a major donation to a suffrage campaign, turning the event into a platform for the cause itself. In doing so, they flipped the script. The very reporters who had hounded them for gossip about their marriages now found themselves taking notes on infant mortality rates or the details of a new education bill. This strategic shift was a masterclass in controlling the narrative. By consistently offering the media a new, more substantive story, they trained editors and the public to see them in a different light. It was a process of re-education. Alva Belmont, for instance, became a master of this approach. She understood the news cycle's hunger for a compelling figure, and she provided one, not as a Vanderbilt divorcee, but as a formidable political strategist. She made sure that when her name appeared in the papers, it was alongside quotes about electoral strategy and women's enfranchisement. She used her natural flair for drama, once reserved for balls, to stage photogenic and impactful suffrage events that were simply too newsworthy for the press to ignore. This was not about suppressing her personality, but about channeling its force into her work. She gave the media the compelling copy they wanted, but on her own terms, ensuring the message was always about the movement. A crucial element of this strategy was the cultivation of key media allies. Just as they built new networks with activists, they also identified sympathetic journalists and editors who were willing to take their advocacy seriously. They would grant exclusive access or a deeper interview to a reporter known for thoughtful coverage of social issues, thereby encouraging more of that type of journalism. This was a far cry from the old model of dealing with the press as a necessary evil. It was a proactive effort to build relationships based on mutual interest. They provided reporters with scoops and exclusive insights into their philanthropic projects, and in return, they received coverage that had depth and credibility. This approach allowed them to bypass the gossip columns and speak directly to a segment of the public that was interested in substantive change. We can see a powerful modern parallel in how some contemporary public figures have navigated similar challenges. After enduring a period of intense and often negative media scrutiny, they have deliberately shifted their public persona. They might launch a well-produced podcast or YouTube channel focused entirely on their charitable foundation or a specific social issue they champion. By creating their own content, they bypass traditional media gatekeepers entirely, controlling the narrative with precision and speaking to their audience without filtration. They use social media not to share glimpses of their private life, but to highlight the work of the grassroots organizations they support, to educate their followers on complex issues, and to mobilize support for legislative action. This modern tactic is a direct descendant of the strategy employed by the Gilded Age advocates. It's about using the tools of publicity not for self-aggrandizement, but for amplification of a cause. It demonstrates a sophisticated understanding that in an attention economy, the most valuable currency is a focused message, and that by feeding the media machine with purposeful content, one can ultimately tame it into an ally for change. Alva Vanderbilt's journey is perhaps the most dramatic illustration of this entire transformation. A story where the architect of the Gilded Cage not only escaped it, but proceeded to dismantle its very foundations. Her early life was a masterclass in ambition within the confines of high society. She was the driving force behind the Vanderbilt family's social ascent, famously orchestrating the most lavish ball in New York history to crash the gates of the old money elite. Yet, for all her strategic brilliance in conquering this world, she remained subject to its most humiliating rules. Her marriage to William Consuelo Vanderbilt, a union that consolidated one of America's greatest fortunes, was deeply unhappy. William was a serial philanderer, and Alva was expected to endure his indiscretions with quiet dignity, as was the custom for women of her station. The system she had so skillfully navigated demanded her silence in the face of profound personal betrayal. But Alva was not a woman who tolerated betrayal quietly. The breaking point came when she discovered William's affair with a well-known socialite. In a move that sent shockwaves through polite society, Alva did the unthinkable. She filed for divorce. In 1895, this was not merely a personal decision. It was a declaration of war against the entire social structure that granted men impunity while demanding female submission. The scandal was astronomical. She was vilified in the press and ostracized by many of her former friends. Yet, in obtaining her freedom, albeit with a substantial settlement, Alva experienced a profound awakening. The divorce was her education in the raw truth of women's powerlessness. She realized that despite her immense wealth and social standing, she had been legally and culturally powerless within her own marriage. This firsthand experience of injustice ignited a fire within her. Her remarriage to Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, a man who genuinely respected her intellect, provided her with a stable partnership. But it was his death in 1908 that truly unleashed her as a public force. Now enormously wealthy and unencumbered by the opinions of a husband or traditional society, Alva Belmont embarked on her true life's work. She plunged into the women's suffrage movement, but she did not simply write a check and attend a few teas. She brought the same ruthless efficiency and grand-scale thinking she had used to conquer New York society to the fight for the vote. She recognized that the movement needed not just funds, but strategy, organization, and most importantly, a powerful public image. Alva became a central figure in the National Woman's Party, the more militant wing of the suffrage movement led by Alice Paul. While more conservative suffragists focused on state-by-state campaigns, Alva understood the need for a federal amendment and the power of dramatic, nonviolent confrontation. She used her fortune as a weapon. She purchased a landmark building in Washington, D.C., just blocks from the White House, and turned it into the National Woman's Party headquarters, dubbing it the Old Mansion or the Suffrage Fortress. This was not just an office. It was a statement of permanent, unignorable presence in the nation's capital. She funded the Silent Sentinels, the women who picketed the White House for 18 months, enduring arrest, brutal force feedings, and public scorn. When they were imprisoned in a brutal workhouse, Alva used her resources to publicize the horrific conditions, turning public sympathy toward the suffragists. Her advocacy was fierce and unapologetic. She famously declared, "Pray to God, she will help you." She organized massive parades down Fifth Avenue, deploying the same sense of spectacle she had once used for balls. But now the marchers carried banners demanding political equality. She understood that winning the vote required changing public perception, and she was a master of propaganda. Alva Belmont was the movement's chief financier, its chief strategist in the arena of public relations, and its most formidable social lobbyist. Her tireless, uncompromising work was instrumental in ratcheting up the pressure that finally led Congress to pass the 19th Amendment in 1919. In Alva, we see the ultimate evolution. A woman who took the pain of her own victimization within the gilded system and transmuted it into a relentless, effective force that helped change the Constitution itself. She transformed her personal fortress of wealth into a fortress for the rights of all women. Yet for every Alva Belmont who wielded her influence like a political sword, there exists a different, equally powerful archetype of the advocate, the empath. This figure's strength lies not in strategic confrontation, but in a profound, almost revolutionary capacity for human connection. And no one in modern history embodies this path more completely than Diana, Princess of Wales. Her journey from a bewildered teenager thrust into the global spotlight to a humanitarian icon was not a calculated rebranding. It was an organic, deeply personal flowering of empathy that forever redefined what it means to be royal. Initially, she was the perfect candidate for a classic red carpet casualty. The world watched, enchanted, as the shy 19-year-old nursery teacher became the fairy tale bride in a dress with a 25-foot train. She was the most photographed woman on the planet, her every public appearance a masterclass in the traditional royal script. Demure, dignified, and distant. But beneath the glamorous surface, the system was crushing her. The rigid protocols of the palace, the lack of emotional support, and the intense pressure precipitated a profound personal crisis, including well-documented struggles with bulimia and depression. She was, by her own account, drowning in the gilded cage, a casualty of the very institution that had elevated her. What sets Diana's story apart is how she channeled that profound personal suffering into the fuel for her advocacy. Instead of allowing her pain to isolate her, it became the source of her radical empathy. She understood what it felt like to be marginalized, to feel unseen and unheard, because in many ways, that was her experience within the palace walls. This personal understanding became the bedrock of her approach. While earlier royal patronages often involved formal, sanitized visits, Diana revolutionized the concept. She introduced a hands-on, tactile style of engagement that was unprecedented. She is famously remembered for her directive during a visit to a hospital: "You can't comfort the afflicted without afflicting the comfortable." And she lived by this principle. She would sit on the beds of patients, hold their hands, and truly listen to their stories. She wasn't afraid to touch those with infectious diseases, to hug children who were terminally ill, or to make physical contact with leprosy patients at a time when such conditions were shrouded in fear and misunderstanding. This was not merely a change in style. It was a fundamental challenge to the established order. The traditional royal model was one of benevolent remoteness, a symbol to be admired from a distance. Diana's approach was one of intimate solidarity. She used her own body, her most visible asset, to communicate a message that words alone could not, that these individuals were not untouchable. They were human beings deserving of compassion and dignity. Her work with AIDS patients, culminating in that landmark handshake, was the ultimate expression of this, but it extended to every cause she championed. When she walked through an active landmine field in Angola in 1997, she wasn't just bringing media attention to the cause. She was physically placing herself in the same danger that plagued the local population every day. She made the abstract terrifyingly real. Her advocacy for the destigmatization of mental health was perhaps the most personal. By speaking openly about her own battles with bulimia and postpartum depression, she broke a centuries-old taboo within the aristocracy, where such struggles were considered private weaknesses. In doing so, she gave millions of people around the world permission to acknowledge their own pain and seek help. She transformed her personal vulnerabilities into a public platform for healing, demonstrating that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the courage to face it openly. Diana's genius was in understanding the power of the image in the television age. She realized that a single, powerful visual could convey more than 1,000 speeches. The photo of her walking through the minefield in a protective visor and flak jacket did more to advance the cause of the international campaign to ban landmines than any diplomatic communique. The image of her cradling a child sick with AIDS challenged prejudices with a quiet force that argument could never match. She mastered the media not by controlling the narrative in a boardroom, but by creating moments of such authentic human connection that the cameras had no choice but to tell the story she was living. She became the people's princess, not through title, but through action. Her legacy is a testament to the idea that the most effective advocacy springs from a place of genuine, shared humanity. Where Alva Belmont used her privilege as a battering ram, Diana used hers as a bridge, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary act is not a shouted demand, but a quiet, extended hand. The true measure of their transformation from socialites to advocates lies not in their intentions, but in the concrete, lasting change they forged in the world. Their work moved far beyond the symbolic, creating ripples of progress that improved countless lives and, in some cases, reshaped the very fabric of society. Consider Consuelo Vanderbilt, who, after her divorce from the Duke of Marlborough and remarriage to Jacques Balsan, dedicated her energy and a significant portion of her wealth to philanthropy. She didn't just lend her name, she lent her strategic mind. Her fundraising efforts were legendary, but they were always directed with precision. She was instrumental in establishing and funding the Vanderbilt Clinic in New York, which provided specialized medical care to women and children, a demographic often overlooked by the medical establishment of the time. Her advocacy extended to education, where she supported schools and programs that offered practical skills to young women, giving them alternatives to the narrow path of marriage that had once defined her own life. Her work demonstrated that philanthropy, when executed with intelligence and compassion, could build lasting institutions that served the public good for generations, turning the vast wealth that had once been a source of her personal confinement into a powerful engine for public health and opportunity. Alva Belmont's impact, however, was of a different, more revolutionary order. Her advocacy was not about building within the system, but about fundamentally altering the system itself. Her financial backing and strategic genius were critical forces behind the final, successful push for the 19th Amendment. The National Woman's Party, with Alva as its primary benefactor and a key strategist, orchestrated a campaign of relentless pressure. The silent sentinels who picketed the White House, the cross-country speaking tours, the sophisticated lobbying efforts, all of this was funded and fueled by Alva's fortune and her unwavering resolve. The tangible result was the enfranchisement of millions of American women, a political earthquake that forever changed the nation's democracy. But her influence didn't stop at the ballot box. She also fought for economic rights, establishing the National Women's Party headquarters as a place where women could find legal aid and support, understanding that political power was intrinsically linked to economic independence. One contemporary activist noted that Alva's willingness to bankroll the movement's most militant tactics gave them a leverage they had never before possessed. Her legacy is quantified in a single, world-altering statistic: the number of women who voted for the first time in the 1920 election, a number that has grown into the many millions of votes cast by women in every election since. She proved that focused, uncompromising advocacy could achieve what decades of polite petitioning had not, turning a radical idea into the law of the land. The ripple effect of Diana, Princess of Wales's work was perhaps the most globally visible, demonstrating how a single individual's compassion could influence international policy. Her campaign against landmines is the quintessential example. Before her involvement, the issue was a complex, technical matter debated by diplomats and military experts, largely invisible to the global public. Diana changed that. Her visit to Angola in 1997, where she walked through a recently cleared minefield in a flak jacket, was broadcast across the world. The images were not just shocking, they were profoundly humanizing. She was photographed with victims, many of them children, who had lost limbs to the hidden explosives. She listened to their stories and amplified them with a clarity and empathy that cut through the political jargon. Her advocacy created a surge of public outrage and awareness that politicians could not ignore. Jody Williams, the coordinator of the international campaign to ban landmines, which won the Nobel Peace Prize that same year, later stated that Diana's involvement was a huge amplification of their work, bringing it to an audience of hundreds of millions. The direct line from her high-profile visits to the signing of the Ottawa Treaty just months after her death, a treaty that banned the use and production of anti-personnel mines, is a powerful testament to her impact. While the treaty's success is a collective achievement, Diana's unique ability to generate global empathy was the catalyst that tipped the scales, demonstrating that advocacy grounded in genuine human connection could literally change the world. This legacy of tangible impact shows that their journey was not merely a personal quest for meaning, but a transfer of energy. The immense social and financial capital that had once been concentrated on maintaining their own status was redirected outward, creating waves of progress that extended far beyond their own lifetime. They took the power of the platform they had been given, a platform built on privilege and often pain, and used it to build hospitals that healed, to win rights that empowered, and to champion treaties that saved lives. Their stories are a powerful rebuttal to the idea that celebrity advocacy is inherently shallow. In their hands, it became a precise tool for change, proving that a fall from grace within a gilded world could be the beginning of a truly meaningful ascent that lifted up countless others along the way. At the heart of this evolution, from a casualty of the system to a champion for change, lies a deeply personal and often overlooked truth. Advocacy was not just a strategic choice, but a profound source of healing. The act of turning outward, of focusing their immense energy on alleviating the suffering of others, became the very process through which these women mended their own fractured spirits. For so long, their value had been defined externally, by their wealth, their title, their appearance. The emptiness that followed their public struggles was a void that parties and possessions could never fill. But in the quiet determination of helping a stranger, in the strategic fight for a larger cause, they discovered something far more sustaining, a sense of purpose that was generated from within. This purpose became an antidote to the isolation and betrayal they had endured. Where the gilded world had treated them as objects, their advocacy work reaffirmed their humanity. It was a daily practice in reclaiming their agency, a way to prove to themselves, above all others, that they were not merely symbols, but sentient, capable forces for good in the world. This transformation can be understood as a powerful psychological shift. The pain they had experienced was no longer a private burden to be carried in silence. It became a source of fuel, a wellspring of empathy that connected them to universal struggles. A woman who had felt the sting of being powerless within her own marriage could now channel that understanding into a fierce determination to secure legal rights for all women. A princess who had known the profound loneliness of life in a gilded cage could now use her visibility to comfort those who were isolated by illness or prejudice. Their personal suffering, rather than defining them as victims, became the foundation for their credibility and compassion. It allowed them to approach their work with an authenticity that could not be manufactured. They weren't distant benefactors looking down from a position of untouchable privilege. They were individuals who had, in their own ways, navigated profound hardship. And that shared experience of struggle created a genuine bond with the people they sought to help. In helping others find a voice, they found their own. In fighting for the dignity of others, they restored their own. This journey toward healing was not a sudden epiphany, but a gradual awakening built through small, consistent acts. For Consuelo Vanderbilt, the simple, unglamorous work of visiting a children's hospital ward, of listening to the concerns of young mothers, provided a tangible connection to a reality far more meaningful than the intricate rituals of ducal life. Each small success, a child receiving care, a family finding support, was a brick laid in the foundation of her new identity. It was proof that her life could have an impact based on her choices and her compassion, not merely on her pedigree. This process allowed her to reframe her own narrative. The story was no longer about the young woman forced into a tragic marriage. It was about the woman who had emerged from that ordeal with a deepened resolve to make a difference. The pain of the past did not disappear, but it was integrated into a larger, more powerful story of resilience and service. The cage, in a sense, lost its power because she had found a key not to escape her past, but to unlock a future where her greatest value was defined by her contribution, not her conformity. Ultimately, this path led them to a form of fulfillment that their previous lives of pure privilege could never offer. The admiration of society was fickle and conditional, vanishing at the first sign of scandal or nonconformity. The satisfaction that came from meaningful work, however, was enduring. It was a fulfillment rooted in action and integrity. We see this most vividly in the later years of these women's lives. Alva Belmont, once the Queen of New York society, found her greatest pride not in the memory of a legendary ball, but in the long, hard-fought victory of the 19th Amendment. Diana's most cherished moments were likely not the glittering state banquets, but the private, unpublicized hours spent holding the hands of the sick and the dying, where she could offer and receive a purely human connection. Their advocacy gave them a legacy that transcended the headlines of their era. They had moved from being the subject of the story to being the authors of their own destinies, and in doing so, they discovered that the most profound healing comes not from being served, but from serving, not from being admired, but from making a difference. Their greatest fulfillment was found not in the spotlight itself, but in what they chose to illuminate with it. While the stories of Alva and Consuelo are powerful, they were far from alone. Their journeys were part of a broader, remarkable wave of American heiresses who used their transatlantic positions as a launch pad for genuine influence. This collective impact reveals a fascinating pattern. The very experience of being treated as a commodity in the marriage market, of feeling the sting of being a casualty of that system, ignited a fierce determination to secure autonomy, not just for themselves, but for other women. Perhaps no one exemplifies this transformation from purchased bride to political pioneer more vividly than Nancy Langhorne, who would become known to the world as Lady Astor. Her story adds a crucial legislative dimension to this legacy of advocacy. Born in Virginia, Nancy's first marriage to a wealthy Bostonian was deeply unhappy, ending in divorce, a bold and socially risky move for a woman at the time. This personal experience of a failed union and the independence she gained from it fundamentally shaped her perspective. When she later married the immensely wealthy Waldorf Astor and moved to England, she arrived not as a timid newcomer eager to assimilate, but as a force of nature, already seasoned by personal hardship and possessing a sharp, often acerbic wit. Her foray into politics was almost accidental, yet perfectly timed. When her husband inherited his father's title, he was required to vacate his seat in the House of Commons and move to the House of Lords. Nancy, displaying the audacity that would become her trademark, decided to run for his now vacant parliamentary seat in Plymouth. The campaign was bruising. She faced relentless sexism and hostility. Opponents argued that a woman's place was in the home, not in the halls of power. But Nancy, drawing on the resilience forged by her own life, met the attacks head on. She campaigned with unmatched energy, using her sharp tongue and personal charm to win over skeptical voters. In 1919, she made history, becoming the first woman to ever take a seat in the British House of Commons. It was a moment of profound symbolic importance, but for Lady Astor, it was merely the beginning of the real work. She saw her position not as a ceremonial honor, but as a platform to advocate for the voiceless, particularly women and children. Her political agenda was directly informed by the understanding of powerlessness she had witnessed and experienced. She fought tirelessly for reforms in child welfare, education, and expanding rights for women, often clashing ferociously with the male-dominated establishment. She brought the lived experience of a woman who had navigated the strictures of two societies into the heart of the British government, refusing to be a silent symbol and instead becoming a vocal and often controversial agent for change. The drive that fueled Lady Astor and so many of her peers can be traced directly back to the peculiar nature of their red carpet experience. Unlike royals born into a system of duty, these women were often abruptly inserted into it as adults through marriage. They were outsiders who had purchased an insider status, and this gave them a unique, critical distance. They had not been raised from birth to see the rigid class structures and gender inequalities of the British aristocracy as natural or unchangeable. Having come from a more dynamic, albeit still deeply unequal, American society, they could see the flaws in the old world system with startling clarity. Their experience as dollar princesses was a double-edged sword. On one hand, they were often looked down upon by the ancient aristocracy as crass newcomers, their wealth a constant reminder of the commercial transaction that underpinned their titles. This subtle ostracism, this feeling of never being fully accepted, prevented them from becoming complacent. It kept them in a state of productive friction with the world they now inhabited. On the other hand, their financial independence, secured through their massive dowries or divorce settlements, gave them a leverage that native-born aristocratic women rarely possessed. They did not have to rely on the approval of a husband or a family for their financial security. They could afford to be bold, to be outspoken, to risk scandal in a way that a woman entirely dependent on her birth family or husband could not. This combination of critical perspective and financial autonomy created a potent catalyst for reform. The collective legacy of these women, therefore, is not just a series of individual charitable acts, but a fundamental injection of progressive American energy into the heart of early 20th century British politics and society. They helped accelerate social change at a critical juncture. While they were products of immense privilege, their specific journey through the crucible of the transatlantic marriage market gave them a visceral understanding of what it meant to have one's life determined by forces beyond one's control. This understanding fueled a powerful empathy that transcended class boundaries. They became advocates not out of a vague sense of noblesse oblige, but from a hardened conviction that the systems they had navigated, systems that treated women as property and prioritized bloodlines over happiness, were fundamentally unjust. Their advocacy was a form of systemic correction, an effort to use the power their wealth and titles afforded them to dismantle, piece by piece, the very structures that had once confined them. In doing so, they transformed the narrative of the dollar princess from a tale of purchased aristocracy into a far more compelling story of political and social awakening. The legacy of these determined women is not confined to the history books. It pulses with vibrant life in the stories of contemporary figures who walk a strikingly similar path. In many ways, the journey of Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, serves as a powerful modern echo of the struggles and transformations we have witnessed. Her experience crystallizes the enduring challenges and the potential for reinvention that define this arc from casualty to advocate. Like Consuelo Vanderbilt, Meghan entered an ancient institution amid a global media frenzy, instantly becoming the subject of intense fascination and scrutiny. The narrative was familiar. The American commoner, a successful woman in her own right, marrying into royalty, a story that seemed to promise a fairy tale conclusion. Yet almost immediately, she faced a level of press intrusion and racially charged commentary that echoed the vilification Alva Belmont endured when she dared to challenge societal norms. The parallels to the psychological toll are unmistakable. Meghan has spoken candidly about the profound isolation and depression she experienced, feeling trapped and unsupported within the very institution that had brought her such visibility. This mirrors the loneliness felt by Diana and the sense of powerlessness described by Consuelo, highlighting that the gilded cage, whether made of marble or digital media, imposes a consistent and heavy burden. Where the parallel becomes most compelling, however, is in her pivot toward advocacy. Following her and Prince Harry's decision to step back from their roles as senior royals, a move akin to Alva Belmont's dramatic divorce from the expectations of her station, Meghan has strategically redirected her platform. She has focused her efforts on issues that resonate deeply with her personal experiences: gender equality, mental health awareness, and the empowerment of women and girls. Through their Archewell Foundation, she and Harry are using their influence to fund and amplify organizations working in these spaces, consciously building a new network of impact, much like the historical figures who sought out activists and intellectuals. Her advocacy, particularly around mental health, draws a direct line to Diana's work, demonstrating a generational understanding of the importance of dismantling stigma. By sharing her own struggles, Meghan, like Diana, transforms personal vulnerability into a tool for public connection, proving that the most effective advocacy often springs from a place of shared, authentic experience. Her story shows that the blueprint established over a century ago, endure the scrutiny, reclaim your narrative, and wield your platform for purposeful change, remains a viable and potent roadmap for public figures today. Meghan is, of course, not the only modern heir to this legacy. We can see reflections of this transformative journey in other women who have navigated the treacherous waters of intense public life. The trajectory of someone like Michelle Obama, while different in origin, shares thematic similarities. As First Lady, she was subjected to a unique form of national scrutiny and often racist caricature. Yet, she masterfully used her platform to champion causes like childhood health and education for girls worldwide, eventually authoring a memoir that became a testament to finding one's voice and purpose amid overwhelming pressure. Similarly, the actress and activist Emma Watson, who grew up in the global spotlight as Hermione Granger, consciously transitioned from child star to a UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, using her fame to launch the impactful He for She campaign for gender equality. These women, each in their own way, demonstrate the same essential pattern. They have moved from being objects of public consumption to becoming active subjects, authors of their own stories who leverage their visibility to illuminate issues larger than themselves. They prove that the journey from red carpet casualty to dedicated advocate is not a relic of the Gilded Age, but a continuing narrative, a testament to the enduring human desire to find meaning beyond the glare of the spotlight and to use one's unique position, however complicated its origins, to make a tangible difference in the world. This very platform, this megaphone that allows them to champion a cause to millions, is also the source of their greatest vulnerability. The same spotlight that illuminates their work also magnifies every perceived flaw, every inconsistency, inviting a level of scrutiny that can undermine their message before it even takes hold. It creates a constant, precarious balancing act, where the immense privilege that funds their advocacy can also be wielded as a weapon against them. The most common and potent accusation leveled at these figures is hypocrisy. When a duchess speaks out against poverty, critics are quick to point to the jewels she wore at her last public appearance, When a modern celebrity launches an environmental initiative, her use of private jets becomes immediate fodder for online condemnation. This is the fundamental paradox they face. They are expected to use the tools of their privilege to create change, yet they are denounced for possessing those very tools. The public often demands a purity test that is nearly impossible to pass, expecting advocates to renounce all trappings of their status to be considered authentic. But such a renunciation would often mean surrendering the very resources and influence that make their work possible in the first place. Navigating this paradox requires a level of self-awareness and strategic communication that is as crucial as the cause itself. The most effective advocates learn to acknowledge their privilege rather than ignore it. They preempt the accusations of hypocrisy by framing their work not as a claim to moral superiority, but as a responsibility that comes with their position. They might openly state, "I have been given a voice that others have not, and I feel a duty to use it for those who cannot be heard." This approach disarms critics by embracing the complexity of the situation. It demonstrates an understanding that their influence is a product of an unequal system, and that their advocacy is an attempt to leverage that inequality for a more equitable outcome. The goal is not to present themselves as having risen above their circumstances, but as using their unique circumstances for a purpose greater than themselves. This nuanced framing can transform a potential weakness into a strength, building a foundation of credibility that is more resilient to attacks. The modern digital landscape has turned this delicate balance into a high-wire act performed without a net. In the Gilded Age, criticism primarily circulated in newspapers and society gossip, which, while potent, had a limited reach and a slower pace. Today, social media creates an echo chamber of outrage, where a single misstep can be amplified into a global controversy within hours. A well-intentioned post about sustainable living can be flooded with comments pointing out an old photograph where the advocate carried a plastic water bottle. The demand for instantaneous, perfect consistency is relentless. This environment forces public figures to be exceptionally deliberate in their messaging. Every public statement, every partnership, every photo op is meticulously analyzed not just for its positive intent, but for any gap between the message and the messenger's lifestyle. The pressure is immense to live a life of flawless alignment with the values they promote, a standard that is humanly unattainable and can lead to a defensive, risk-averse approach to advocacy that stifles genuine impact. The key to weathering this storm often lies in a relentless focus on tangible outcomes over personal image. When criticism arises, the most resilient advocates redirect the conversation back to the work itself. Instead of getting bogged down in defending their right to speak on an issue, they pivot to showcasing the results of their efforts. They share data, highlight the stories of individuals helped by their foundations, and report on the progress of specific projects. By keeping the focus on the cause and its beneficiaries, they make it harder for the narrative to be solely about them. This strategy requires a thick skin and a deep, genuine commitment to the mission. It means understanding that some criticism will always exist, and that trying to please everyone is a futile endeavor. Their effectiveness is ultimately measured not by their popularity, but by the lives they impact. This focus on substance over symbolism allows them to build a legacy that can withstand the inevitable cycles of public approval and disapproval, ensuring that their work continues to make a difference long after the headlines about their personal choices have faded. For these women, the initial foray into advocacy was rarely a calculated career move. It often began as a lifeline, a way to find purpose in the wake of personal devastation. But what distinguishes their stories is that this initial spark did not fade. It ignited a fire that would burn for the rest of their lives, transforming a reaction to circumstance into a proactive, lifelong mission. This was not a temporary diversion to rehabilitate a public image. It was the discovery of a core identity that would guide their decisions for decades to come. The work itself became addictive, not for the praise it might bring, but for the profound sense of fulfillment it provided, a feeling entirely absent from their previous lives of passive privilege. Once they experienced the tangible impact of their efforts, the satisfaction of seeing a policy change or a life improved, there was simply no returning to the shallow concerns of their former existence. The Gilded Cage lost its allure because they had found the key to a much larger world, one where their actions had real meaning. We can trace this evolution from pastime to purpose in the remarkable longevity of their commitments. Consuelo Vanderbilt's dedication to social welfare did not end with her divorce from the Duke of Marlborough or her subsequent happy marriage to Jacques Balsan. If anything, it intensified. Freed from the oppressive constraints of her first marriage, she was able to channel her energies more fully and authentically. Her philanthropic work, which began with supporting hospitals and maternal health, expanded and deepened over the years. She became a patron of the arts and education, understanding that cultural and intellectual enrichment were just as vital to human dignity as physical health. She didn't just write checks. She served on boards, advised on strategy, and used her sharp intellect and hard-won social acumen to ensure her contributions were effective. This was a commitment that spanned nearly 5 decades, a testament to the fact that her advocacy was not a phase tied to a personal crisis, but an integral part of who she had become. Her later years were defined by this work, a quiet but powerful legacy that stood in stark contrast to the sensationalized narrative of her youth. Similarly, Alva Belmont's commitment to women's rights consumed the final 3 decades of her life with an almost revolutionary fervor. After the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, many suffragists considered the battle won and moved on to other pursuits. Not Alva. For her, the vote was not the finish line, it was the starting gun. She recognized that political enfranchisement was just the first step toward true equality. She continued to lead the National Woman's Party, shifting its focus to the next great hurdle, the Equal Rights Amendment. She fought tirelessly for this constitutional guarantee of equal rights regardless of sex, a battle that, as we know, continues to this day. She poured her fortune and her formidable energy into this new campaign, funding lobbying efforts, writing pamphlets, and organizing rallies with the same intensity she had brought to the fight for the vote. Her advocacy evolved to meet the new challenges of the 20th century, demonstrating a remarkable ability to adapt and persist. This was not the work of a woman seeking a temporary spotlight. It was the life's work of a visionary who understood that social change is a marathon, not a sprint. She remained a central driving force in the feminist movement until her death in 1933. Her entire identity reshaped around the cause of equality. This long-term dedication also allowed their advocacy to mature and become more sophisticated. As they gained experience, they moved beyond simple charity towards systemic change. A woman who started by funding a single hospital wing might, years later, be lobbying for national public health reforms. They learned from their successes and their failures, refining their strategies and building coalitions that could sustain the work over the long term. This evolution proved the authenticity of their transformation. A fleeting interest would have withered under the constant pressure of criticism and the slow, grinding pace of legislative change. But a genuine conviction only grows stronger when tested. Their lifelong commitment stands as the most powerful rebuttal to any accusation of opportunism. It is one thing to champion a cause when the cameras are flashing. It is another entirely to devote 30 or 40 years to the painstaking, often thankless work of building institutions, changing laws, and shifting public opinion. That kind of endurance can only be fueled by a deep and abiding belief in the rightness of the mission, a belief that finally gave these women the profound sense of self-worth that their gilded worlds had always denied them. Of course, these extraordinary journeys are not without their complexities, and any honest assessment must confront the valid critiques that shadow their advocacy. The most persistent criticism is that their efforts, however well-intentioned, ultimately amounted to a form of privileged tourism, a temporary foray into the struggles of the less fortunate that never truly threatened the power structures from which they themselves benefited. This argument suggests that a duchess funding a hospital for the poor is merely applying a bandage to a wound caused by the very economic inequalities that her own vast fortune represents. She may alleviate suffering in one specific instance, but does she challenge the system that allows such immense wealth to concentrate in so few hands while others lack basic necessities? From this perspective, their philanthropy can be seen as a safety valve, a way to release social pressure without initiating genuine systemic reform. It allows the elite to appear benevolent while preserving the status quo that keeps them in power. This critique extends to the notion of sincerity. Skeptics might argue that for these women, advocacy was the most socially acceptable hobby available, a dignified way to fill their time and rehabilitate a damaged public image after a personal scandal. When Alva Belmont turned to suffrage, was it a genuine conversion to the cause, or was it simply a new, more exciting arena in which to exercise her boundless ambition and thirst for power, replacing the social battlefield with a political one? The dramatic flair with which she operated, the grand parades, the confrontational tactics, could be interpreted as a performance, a way to remain at the center of attention rather than a selfless dedication to the collective good. The very tools of their advocacy, their wealth and social status, are the same tools that perpetuated the hierarchies they claimed to want to dismantle. Can one truly be a revolutionary when their power is derived from the system they are critiquing? There is also the uncomfortable question of impact versus symbolism. While Diana's handshake with an AIDS patient was undeniably powerful, did it directly lead to increased government funding for research or changes in healthcare policy? or did it primarily serve to burnish her own image as a compassionate icon? Her work brought immense awareness, but critics might contend that awareness alone does not always translate into tangible, lasting change for the millions affected. The same could be said for modern celebrity activism. A passionate speech at a fundraiser can generate headlines, but if it isn't followed by sustained lobbying, strategic funding, and a willingness to challenge corporate or government power, it risks being merely symbolic, a way to feel involved without engaging in the messy, unglamorous work of political organizing. These are not simple questions to dismiss. They force us to grapple with the inherent contradictions of advocacy from a position of extreme privilege. However, to fully understand these women, we must also consider the context in which they operated. For a Gilded Age heiress or a 20th century royal, the options for meaningful public engagement were severely limited. They were barred from voting, from holding office in most cases, and from pursuing independent careers. Philanthropy and social work were among the few avenues available for them to exert any influence on the world. Within those constraints, their actions were remarkably radical. Alva Belmont didn't just host charity teas. She funded a political movement that directly challenged the legal foundations of patriarchy. When she fought for the vote, she was attacking a system that had disenfranchised all women, including herself. The most compelling defense of their legacy lies in the tangible outcomes we have already explored. It is difficult to dismiss the 19th Amendment as mere privileged tourism when it enfranchised half the population. It is hard to argue that the Ottawa Treaty on landmines was merely symbolic when it has saved countless lives. These women used the only tools they had access to, and they used them with strategic brilliance. They operated within a system they did not create, pushing its boundaries as far as they possibly could. Their advocacy may not have been a pure, perfect revolution, but it was a form of pragmatic, powerful insurgency that achieved real progress. The debate itself is valuable, reminding us that the relationship between privilege and progress is never straightforward, and that the work of creating a more just world requires constant self-reflection and a critical eye toward the sources of our own influence. The powerful real-life journeys we've been exploring haven't just shaped history. They have also deeply influenced our collective imagination, cementing the red carpet casualty to advocate arc as a compelling and enduring trope in literature and film. Storytellers have long recognized the dramatic potential in this transformation, using it to explore timeless themes of identity, constraint, and liberation. Perhaps no author captured the Gilded Cage with more piercing accuracy than Edith Wharton, who wrote from within that very world. In her novel The House of Mirth, her heroine, Lily Bart, is the quintessential red carpet casualty. A breathtakingly beautiful woman born into faded aristocracy, Lily is groomed for one purpose: to secure a wealthy husband and reclaim her social standing. She moves through the ballrooms and drawing rooms of old New York with practiced grace, her every gesture and gown calculated for maximum effect. Yet, Lily possesses a fatal flaw for a woman in her position: a yearning for authenticity and a delicate moral compass that prevents her from fully committing to the heartless calculations required for social survival. We watch with a sense of mounting dread as she makes a series of small, desperate missteps, a moment of indiscreet friendship, a poorly timed gamble at bridge, a refusal to play her cards with ruthless precision. Each mistake chips away at her reputation, and the society that once adored her turns its back with chilling swiftness. Lily's fall from grace is a slow-motion tragedy, a stark fictional portrayal of how the system consumes those who cannot or will not conform. Her story is a devastating critique of a world that values women as decorative objects, and her ultimate tragedy resonates because it reflects the very real fates of many women who lacked the financial or emotional means to escape. Moving from the page to the screen, this archetype has been reinvented for new generations. A more modern, yet equally powerful example can be found in the film The Devil Wears Prada. At first glance, Andy Sachs appears to be the antithesis of a Gilded Age heiress. She's a recent journalism graduate with ideals and a disdain for the superficial world of high fashion. But when she takes a job as the assistant to the formidable Miranda Priestley, she is thrust onto a new kind of red carpet, the runway of global influence and cutting-edge style. Initially a casualty of this environment, she is mocked for her lack of style, belittled for her naivete, and emotionally crushed by the demands of her boss. To survive, Andy undergoes a metamorphosis. She learns the rules, adopts the costume, and even begins to excel, gaining the approval of the very world she once scorned. She becomes, for a time, a celebrated insider. But the film's crucial turning point comes when Andy realizes the personal cost of this success. She sees the human wreckage left in Miranda's wake and recognizes the same moral compromises beginning to erode her own relationships and values. In a moment of clarity, she chooses to walk away, not in defeat, but in a powerful act of self-preservation. Her advocacy is not for a public cause, but for her own soul. She reclaims her identity, taking the skills and resilience she gained in the crucible of Runway magazine and using them to pursue a career with integrity. Andy's journey mirrors the real-life pivot we've seen. She uses the platform and the toughened skin she acquired in the Gilded Cage as a foundation for a more authentic life. The reason this trope resonates so profoundly with audiences is that it taps into a near-universal human experience, albeit on a less dramatic scale. While most of us will never know the glare of the flashbulbs or the weight of a royal title, we all understand the pressure to conform to external expectations. We have all, in some way, felt the strain of performing a role: the perfect employee, the ideal parent, the popular friend, only to feel our true selves being eroded in the process. The story of a character breaking free from a gilded cage, whether it's a literal palace or a metaphorical one like a high-pressure job or a suffocating social circle, provides a cathartic release. It allows us to live vicariously through their rebellion and their ultimate self-reclamation. These narratives give us a blueprint for courage, showing that it is possible to walk away from a life of prescribed privilege and prestige in search of something more meaningful. They validate our own secret longing to be valued for who we are, not for how well we perform. Furthermore, these stories often serve as a sharp social critique. By following a character's journey from insider to critic, the audience is led to question the very foundations of the glamorous worlds presented to us. The glittering ballroom is revealed to be a prison. The powerful job is exposed as a soul-crushing trap. This narrative arc holds a mirror up to society, challenging us to examine our own complicity in systems that value appearance over substance and status over humanity. Whether in the novels of Wharton or the popcorn fun of a modern comedy drama, the journey from casualty to advocate continues to captivate because it is, at its heart, a story about the eternal and deeply personal quest for authenticity. So where does this leave us, sitting here in the present day, so far removed from the ballrooms of the Gilded Age and the protocols of the palace? The true power of these stories isn't just in their dramatic arcs. It's in the universal, deeply human lessons they offer about navigating our own challenges, regardless of our station in life. The first and perhaps most crucial lesson is about the nature of resilience. We often mistake resilience for stoicism, the ability to endure hardship without showing a crack. But the women we followed show us a different model. Their resilience wasn't about silent suffering. It was about adaptive recovery. It was the capacity to be broken by a system and then, piece by piece, to reassemble themselves into something new and stronger, using the very fragments of their old identity as building materials. Resilience in their stories is not a shield that prevents pain, but a transformative process that alchemizes pain into purpose. It's the decision, after hitting bottom, to use the solid ground of that despair as a foundation to build upon. This is a lesson accessible to anyone. You don't need a title or a fortune to practice this kind of resilience. You only need the willingness to look at your own pain and ask, not, why did this happen to me? But what has this experience taught me about what I truly value? And how can I use that knowledge to move forward? This leads directly to the second great lesson, the reclamation of one's narrative. Each of these women, from Consuelo to Diana to Meghan, experienced what it was like to have their story written for them by others, by the press, by their families, by the demands of society. They were characters in a script they didn't author. Their transformation began the moment they seized the pen. Reclaiming your narrative is an act of profound power. It means stopping the performance of who you're supposed to be and starting the messy, courageous work of determining who you actually are. In a world saturated with social media, where we are all constantly crafting and curating our public personas, this lesson is more relevant than ever. How often do we feel pressured to present a life that is perfectly polished, successful, and happy, even when it doesn't align with our internal reality? The journey from casualty to advocate teaches us that authenticity is not about revealing every detail, but about aligning your public actions with your private values. It's about choosing the causes you champion, the work you do, and the relationships you cultivate based on what resonates with your core self, not what will win the most approval from an external audience. This reclamation is a continuous process, a daily practice of choosing your own definition of success over someone else's. Perhaps the most hopeful lesson is about the potential for positive change, no matter your starting point. It would be easy to dismiss these stories because they began with immense privilege, but to do so is to miss the point. Their privilege was not the source of their redemption. It was the specific nature of their cage. Your cage might look entirely different. It might be a dead-end job, a difficult family situation, a health challenge, or a period of profound self-doubt. The universal takeaway is that the tools for your liberation are often found within the confines of the challenge itself. The heiresses used their wealth and social access. Diana used her global visibility. A modern person might use their specific skills, their community connections, or their personal story. The principle is the same. Identify the unique platform, however small it may seem, that your circumstances have given you, and then pivot it towards something meaningful. You don't need $1 million to volunteer at a local shelter. You don't need a royal title to mentor a young person in your community. Advocacy begins with the simple, powerful decision to turn your attention outward, to connect your personal struggle to a larger human one. Your platform might be your voice in a town hall meeting, your talent for organizing, or your willingness to listen to a friend in need. The scale is irrelevant. The intentionality is everything. These historical and modern narratives ultimately serve as a powerful mirror, encouraging us to reflect on our own lives. They ask us to consider the ways in which we might be living inside a gilded cage of our own making, a career path chosen for status rather than passion, a relationship maintained for appearance rather than connection, a life lived on autopilot according to society's script. The call to action is not to stage a dramatic exit worthy of a movie, but to start asking the quiet, disruptive questions that lead to authentic living. What would it mean to redefine success on your own terms? How can you use your particular skills and experiences, especially the painful ones, to ease the burden of someone else? The journey of these women proves that our greatest wounds can become the source of our deepest empathy and our most impactful contributions. Their legacy is an invitation to believe that no matter how constrained your circumstances may feel, the ability to choose your response, to author your next chapter, and to find a purpose that transcends your own self-interest is a power that always remains within your grasp. It is a testament to the enduring human capacity not just to survive, but to transform our scars into compass points, guiding us toward a life of genuine meaning and connection. What an incredible journey we have traced together, from the glittering, suffocating world of the red carpet to the hard, meaningful work of the advocate's path. These women, Consuelo Vanderbilt, Alva Belmont, Princess Diana, and so many others, show us that the most dazzling beginnings can sometimes lead to the darkest personal moments, but also that within that darkness lies the potential for a truly spectacular rebirth. Their stories are not just historical footnotes. They are powerful blueprints for transformation. They teach us that a fall from public grace, a moment of being cast as a casualty, does not have to be an ending. In fact, it can be the necessary rupture that forces a reevaluation of everything, the catalyst that ignites a search for a purpose far greater than mere social approval or inherited status. The thread connecting a Gilded Age heiress funding a hospital to a modern royal campaigning against landmines is the profound realization that privilege, however gilded the cage it creates, can be repurposed. The very platform that once confined them became their most powerful tool. They performed the ultimate alchemy, turning the leaden weight of expectation into the gold of impactful action. This was not a rejection of their position, but a radical reimagining of it. They asked not, "How can I escape this?" but "How can I use this?" They understood that a famous name could open doors, a fortune could fund movements, in a global spotlight could illuminate injustices that would otherwise remain in the shadows. Their greatest legacy is this lesson in resourcefulness, that our circumstances, however challenging, contain within them the seeds of our own liberation and the means to help others. So, what does this mean for you right now? You may not have a title or a fortune, but you absolutely have a platform. Your platform might be your voice in a community meeting, your talent for writing or creating, your presence on social media, or simply your willingness to listen to a friend in need. It is the unique combination of your experiences, your skills, and your sphere of influence, however large or small it may feel. The call to action is not to become a global icon, but to embrace the power of intentional advocacy in your own life. Look at the world around you. What injustice makes your heart ache? What cause sparks a fire in you? Your own moments of difficulty, your own experiences of being underestimated or overlooked, have given you an empathy and an understanding that is uniquely yours. That is your strength. Do not underestimate the ripple effect of a single, deliberate act. Sharing a resource, volunteering your time, having a courageous conversation, or using your particular skills to support an organization you believe in. These are the building blocks of change. Let these stories of transformation inspire you to audit your own life. Where are you performing a role that feels inauthentic? Where can you pivot your energy, even in a small way, towards something that aligns with your deepest values? The journey from casualty to advocate begins with a single, quiet decision to stop living by someone else's script and to start writing your own. It is about finding the courage to use whatever platform you have to stand for something that matters. If you have been captivated by these tales of resilience and redemption, of turning pain into purpose, then make sure to subscribe. We have so many more stories to share of fascinating figures who dared to redefine their legacies and, in doing so, changed the world around them. Your own story of impact is waiting to be written.